Good morning and welcome everybody. My name is James Cook. Let's vlog. And today we're going to talk about Tesla's battery day, or the sort of investor relations event that was. Was it exciting or was it boring? That is the question. Elon Musk has been talking about Battery Day for what feels like forever. My word, the lighting is so shocking in this room. Don't worry, I have a plan for where we can go in a minute. We'll sort that right out. So Battery Day was supposed to be originally in the spring, and then there was some coronavirus and some general delays, and now it is firmly in September. Now we've had it, and I thought it was very interesting, although the Tesla share price did take a bit of a dip afterwards. I'm not quite sure what everyone else was expecting. Perhaps something more dramatic. The webcast got started with some sort of investor news. It was also a sort of shareholder meeting of sorts. There was a lot of stuff about how Tesla's progressed so far to date. Berlin Gigafactory, Shanghai, global sales, the number of cars they've sold, the progress with autopilot as well. I actually found that quite interesting. They were talking about how they basically had to do a near complete code rebuild because what they found was that they were basically stuck in a local maxima, which is, I don't know how much people know about narrow AI, but effectively you've got a solution space and you know your solution is somewhere within that space, and what you're looking for is the optimum point according to some constraints. So if you think of it as sort of like a 3D topographical map with sort of peaks and valleys and stuff like that, and what you've got to do is you've got to work out how to adjust the various inputs so that you wind up with the best possible outcome. And the problem is you can go to a local peak and not realize there's a much better outcome just over here on the other side of the valley, but you don't know how to get there. And that's effectively what it means when you're stuck in a local maxima. You've found a reasonable solution that you can't improve upon, even though there's probably a better solution somewhere else within the solution space. So they did a bunch of rebuilding on that, and apparently it's going quite well. There is supposed to be a private beta of the full self-driving software within a month or so, according to Elon. Now, I don't know if this is Elon time or something more dependable than that. But either way, private beta suggests to me effectively Tesla employees, people who are going to fully understand the limits of the system and be watching out for it to make mistakes so that they can leap in and rescue the situation. So I think it probably will be a while before it's more in a sort of a public beta sort of end of things. If they get to the private beta and it works well, then obviously that will come, and hopefully fairly soon, because it would be great to see some proper progress on the full self-driving side of things. I think there's certainly the current autopilot software that's out there leaves a lot to be desired in terms of self-driving at all, really, for any point in the journey. So yeah, that was exciting to hear, although it just made up a tiny bit of the day's webcast. Now I think it's time to swap to my new location for videos like this. That's right, folks, I've been meaning to have a go with my green screen for a while, and I finally got it out. And I figure it'll work quite well here, because I've got this beam across the top. Gives me something to sort of hang it from. Anyway, let's give it a try. So first, let's start with what was announced in this Tesla Battery Day before we start talking about what everyone hoped would be announced. Well, firstly, what is driving Elon Musk's crazy desire to make everything be battery powered, or certainly everything with wheels? Well, it's climate change. He's looking at the situation and he's thinking to himself, this cannot be good. Why are we doing this? After all, it's not like continuing to use oil and petroleum products to power everything is something that we can do into the future. It's gonna come to an end. That's a certainty. Elon Musk accepts that progress has been made in terms of combating climate change, but he rightly points out that nothing like enough progress has been made, and that the quicker we can get there, the easier it will be to get there, and the less damage will be done to the environment in the process. So that's why he's all about making all transport electric, certainly anything with wheels. And so what he's looking for here is a plan, is a way to actually make this come to fruition. And that means he is going to need batteries, lots and lots of batteries, which presents a bit of a problem because the existing battery manufacturing capacity of the world is barely enough to satisfy Tesla's demand for batteries, let alone stationary storage and all the other various uses out there. So what is Tesla's ultimate mission? It's to try to make the entire of that energy cycle be reusable. Clean energy production, clean energy storage, and clean energy utilization, principally in this case in vehicles. Because let's face it, the vast majority of stuff around the house is in fact powered by electricity anyway. The only notable exception being heaters, and even then, if you used electricity to run a well-designed heater, it would be quite efficient. We just don't. And so he estimated that it would take 150 terawatt hours of batteries, that's terawatt hours, that's 1,000 gigawatt hours, and that would be just what's required to convert all cars to battery powered. That's nothing about grid scale storage or house storage, right? Just the cars. So we're going to need some more battery factories then, aren't we? And we're going to need to make batteries really cheaply. And we're going to need to use commonly abundant and cheap and easy to access elements from the environment. And these are all basically the issues that Elon Musk addressed in this web presentation. I do love the way Elon Musk just goes, what's the current problem? What's needed to fix it? Can we do that? All right then, let's get on with it. Everyone else goes, oh, that's a huge challenge. Well, maybe we can make like 1 or 2% difference here or there. No, Elon Musk is like, how do we get all the way? And that's why he's alighted on this concept of making all vehicles electrified. But to do that, he is going to need to bring down the cost of batteries substantially. And that is what he talked about for the most part in this presentation. So his plan is to reduce the cost per kilowatt hour by about 50%, while simultaneously increasing the range you can get out of your EV by about 50%, and reducing the investment per kilowatt hour necessary to make those batteries by about 75%. So in other words, he wants to move everything in the right direction by a really noticeable amount. And you know how he's planning on doing it? A series of small improvements across the whole battery production chain, including the materials, the design processes, the manufacturing processes, everything. The whole thing is just completely reworked in order to wring every last bit of efficiency out of that process. And it sounds like they've worked the maths out and they're onto a winner. From a design point of view, what they've tried to do is find the optimal size of cell. So recently they've moved away from the 18650 to the 2170 cell format. It's just basically a bit wider and a bit taller, and that means there's a little bit more energy density in that cell. And they've been looking for where you can get the sort of the right size cell, but without losing the thermal efficiency, because of course as the cell gets bigger it becomes much harder to keep the whole thing cool, and you don't want hot spots developing within the cell, that sort of thing. And they've come up with a bit of a solution to that, because normal lithium ion cells have got tabs in them that sort of link up to the positive electrode at the top of the battery. And what they've tried to do is design a larger cell format that is tabless, and therefore the pathway for the electricity to take out of that cell is shorter, and consequently it generates less heat. That's the logic behind it, and they say it works. Fantastic. Apparently none of this stuff is trivial, although it does sound quite trivial. I can imagine that when you're talking about making millions of battery cells on a regular basis, it does become a bit more of a challenge, rather than just making, say, one in a lab. We'll come back to that a bit later. In terms of how to actually make the cell, they've been trying to make a sort of continuous motion production system, something which can churn out cells on a continuous basis without ever having to have a bit of the process where the actual production line is stationary for any length of time, because that just enables the whole thing to flow through that much quicker. When we talk about moving things through quickly, they're also moving towards a dry coating process for the anode, I believe it is. And they also want to change the anode slightly. Silicon is the material that they want to put into that anode. Now, in the past, it's been quite difficult to sort of make anodes out of silicon, principally because if you take the raw silicon, it will absorb the lithium and it will end up increasing in size 4 times, which is very difficult to build into a material because you find that the material doesn't stay where you put it with that much expansion. And that obviously leads to a cell with poor cycle life, and it just doesn't work well. That's not a goer. They needed to do something else there. So they have found a way to work out the bugs, coating that silicon and enabling it to form the anode in a way that allows it to expand when required and contract when required. I mean, honestly, I don't really understand what it is they're doing at all. I just understand the vaguest level of chemistry that's going on. And it does sound promising, very promising, if they can make it manufacturable for a decent price. And that's the key here. That's the key for them as well. And one of the reasons they like silicon is because silicon is an incredibly abundant element in the Earth's crust. So it makes perfect sense for them to try and use that, because expensive, rare, difficult to get materials have all sorts of environmental problems, not to mention scalability problems, and it'll get in the way of making those cheap batteries that enable everything else that Elon Musk wants to achieve with Tesla. On the cathode side of things, they are hoping to move away from using any cobalt at all in the cathode of these battery cells. Instead, use principally nickel, which is, that's the one that gives you the highest energy density. The problem with nickel, though, is it can be difficult to work with. Again, I mean, this is always the problem. The chemical ideal in a battery is very difficult to build into an actual battery because of the realities of some of those chemical processes that go on. They reckon they've got that problem solved. I mean, I don't fully understand what that involves. By all accounts, they're getting there with it. And at every step along the way, what Tesla is trying to do is reduce the cost of the manufacturing and increase the speed of the manufacturing so that they can produce very large quantities of batteries at a pretty reasonable price. So that's with all of these things. Not only is it yielding a slight improvement in range or energy density or simplifying the process, it is also cheaper to get the materials, cheaper to use the materials, cheaper to produce the batteries. And that's the key thing that Elon is trying to achieve here. And in support of that, one of the last sort of pieces of the puzzle in making the electric vehicle end product as cheap as possible is to actually build that battery in as a fundamental structural part of the chassis. Now, I kind of thought that to some extent that was what they do already, and I think to some extent it is, in that the existing battery pack in Teslas does add to the rigidity of the chassis. However, now they're talking, as far as I can see, pretty much bolting a front end and back end chassis onto the battery pack and having it be that kind of integral. Apparently that will reduce the costs whilst also simultaneously increasing the range and performance. So all good, and actually make the vehicle tougher as well. And because of this cell format size change, they can actually move those cells a bit more central into the pack, away from the periphery of the vehicle, which should mean that it will be able to turn more nimbly round corners, which is, a win for a brand that for the most part seems to be quite keen on producing performance vehicles. So that's the end result that they're working towards then. 50% more range, 50% lower cost at the cell level, and 75% odd decrease in the investment required in order to build that kilowatt hour of batteries. Obviously, these changes aren't going to happen overnight. It's going to take sort of 3 or so years for all of these things to start to come through onto the production line and for us to really sort of see the end results. But you know what? Rome wasn't built in a day. Eventually, Tesla is hoping to produce 20 million cars a year, which would represent about 1% of the on-the-road car fleet as it stands right now. And to do that, they're going to need all these battery factories and enhanced processes and all the rest of it. So you can see the scale of the challenge, but it's a challenge that they seem to be embracing and really taking to very well, which is great because somebody needs to, and nobody else seems to actually be, well, bothered yet. A couple of other vehicle related announcements that they did sort of pop in there. One is that Tesla is still fully committed to the idea of producing a $25,000 car as soon as they can, and hopefully off the back of this battery work or rework, they will get the cost improvements they need in order to actually start delivering that, which is be very exciting because at the moment it is a big problem. The really capable EVs are just outside of most people's budget, the upfront budget. If we can get that insanely expensive at the beginning bit down, then that will make this much more accessible as a transport technology to the wider population, and that's what Tesla wants, it's what Elon Musk wants, it's what I want, it's what everyone wants, I think, more or less. Except maybe Jeremy Clarkson. And the other car-related piece of news that they let us in on is that the Plaid Model S, this is the 3-motor version that can do the Laguna Seca racetrack, I think in something like a minute and a half, which is pretty good going. There's a nice fast car there for them. And they reckon they can knock another 3 seconds off as well. So yeah, that is going to be an insanely quick vehicle. Great fun. Also going to be quite expensive. A bit of a halo product. Something to pull people in and to make sure that Teslas remain the fastest production car on the planet. Or thereabouts at any rate. It might not actually be the fastest because there could be some $1 million. So that's the Model S Plaid. That's going to be fun. That'll be arriving back end of 2021. Probably if you're in a right-hand drive market, I would imagine you won't get it till the spring of 2022. But, you know, it's a toy, right? Admittedly, it's a toy that you can take your kids to school and do the shopping run in. But still, you don't need the performance that goes with that. There's no realistic need for anyone to have a car that accelerates that quickly. So yeah, I consider that a toy, but a fun one nonetheless. So in conclusion, was it an exciting web presentation or a bit of a letdown? Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. I think a lot of people were hoping that Tesla was going to announce some massive solid state battery breakthrough that was going to make batteries as cheap as chips and last forever and have enormous power and 1,000-mile ranges and all the rest of it. And maybe we'll get there one day. In the labs, those kind of batteries do already exist. But the thing is with Tesla, and they've always been this way, they're not really interested in technologies that could be great in the future because they want to make cars right now. And in order to do that, they need batteries right now. Like, for example, I found it very interesting when they were talking about the dry filming process. That is apparently a process which they acquired with the Maxwell acquisition that battery maker. And I remember a lot of people were sort of speculating as to why Tesla bought that and what the point. And I think basically where they went with it is they looked at it and they went, you know what, that dry application process will be much easier and much simpler than the current wet process that we use, and we can make that production ready in a reasonable amount of time. And they're on to like the 4th iteration of the coating machine, and Elon reckons it'll be the sort of 6th or 7th revision of that machine before they actually have it right for series production. And they'll probably get there with that within a reasonable time frame. And that's the difference between these sorts of battery announcements and the kind of battery announcements that go, look at this magic battery we've created, it's incredible. An electric car with this battery would have a 2,000-mile range and it would charge in 5 minutes, and everyone goes, wow, that's incredible, can I buy one? They go, well, yes you can, but it cost me £10,000 and a week to make a cell that's not big enough to run your watch. Well, if that's the case, you've got a serious barrier to replacing the energy storage needs of humanity with that technology. And that's where Tesla's coming from with it. So in a lot of ways, I'm actually much more excited to have this sort of announcement versus the sort of announcement that is, a bit like when they had an autonomy day, I think they called it, when they were talking about Tesla's full self-driving and robo-taxis, and it's going to be here, so just around the corner. And yeah, they do that every year. As far as I can tell, Elon Musk has said that full self-driving is coming next year, and he has said that every year for the last 5 years. So, at this point, I'm kind of thinking it might be a while. And I think the problem is that it's something that's quite far out there, and they don't know exactly how much work is required to close that gap. And they shouldn't have that problem with what they've announced today with batteries, which is why I find that more exciting than if they announced, the solid state, amazing 1,000-mile battery that's all yay. And so that's why I'm excited by this presentation, because it was all about what they're doing right now that will make a real big difference to the whole of humanity in the next, certainly decade, but actually realistically in the next 4 to 5 years. Most of these changes should have percolated through society and through the manufacturing and production industries behind batteries and cars and stuff like that, and stationary storage as well. And we really need to make a big change, and that's what this seems to be. It seems to be about the industrialization of that battery production process and the optimization of the end product in order to solve a real problem that humanity is grappling with right now. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, remember to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you don't already. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreons, and I will see you in the next episode of my vlog. Bye! It's gonna come to an end. I should put my phone on silent really, shouldn't I? Replacing 1% of the global vehicle fleet. I'm bothered. Climate change does bother me. It is, I remember when I was young and 30-degree plus weeks were not a common event. I'm sure the climate shouldn't change this quickly, or at least if it does, why is it always going up?